Now we have moved to another important session. It's a panel discussion on the topic Reviving the Business Amidst Insolvency, a Top Management Standpoint. This session will cover points such as devising a robust business continuity plan while ongoing CIRP, after effects of IBC suspension on struggling lenders, and what options do they have, etc. I would like to invite Nishant Singh, partner Indus Law, to moderate this session. In the last 16 years, Nishant has worked on a wide array of corporate transactions, including M&A, private equity, joint ventures, and capital market transactions across multiple sectors. Most recently, Legal 500 2020 edition listed Nishant in the elite leading lawyers list for banking and finance and recognized him as recommended lawyer for corporate and M&A. Over to you, Mr. Singh.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Nishant Singh. I'm a partner with Indus Law. I focus my practice on corporate transaction and insolvency work. I've been in this space for the last 18 years. I've worked in the US and in India, and that's been my focus area in the stress asset market, where I represent hedge funds which have been investing in this market either to buy assets or to trade in certain opportunity. It's my pleasure and privilege to actually moderate this panel this afternoon. I've got very distinguished panelists with me. So to begin with, I have Misha. She is a partner with Shardul Amachan Mangaldas, and she focuses her practice on bankruptcy and insolvency matters. She's been part of many landmark litigation which have gone on, like BSPL, SR, and we will definitely have a chance to interact with her and pick her brain on some of the developments which are really shaping up the stress asset market in India. We've got Mr. Kanoria, very experienced entrepreneur. He's vice chairman of Shrey Infrastructure, and he's been in the business for very, very long time. And we look forward to benefit from his business insight on the ground. And we have Akash Suri. He is part of Yes Bank, and he started the stress asset vertical. Akash has been in this business for a very, very long time. And more specifically, Yes Bank having gone through such a tumultuous period and come out of the woods, I think we will have really deep insight into the subject matter. So to set the agenda for this panel discussion, we are looking at a very, very interesting time. I wouldn't want to spend too much of time how COVID has ravaged businesses all around the globe and has very deep impact in India too. And during this time, it's very, very crucial how business continuity is maintained. I think when COVID hit sometime in March and we all went into lockdown, this is a very, very unprecedented situation that the whole world experienced. No one had any clue how to actually handle the situation. Governments, businesses, we have all come together to see how to go on despite this virus has really affected all of us. So on this note, I think the first item that we would like to sort of put for discussion is how business continuity is affected and how we are seeing when IBC was put under suspension. There was a moratorium by Reserve Bank of India. And that moratorium, interestingly, is still continuing because of the blessing of the Supreme Court in a way. Supreme Court is right now is in the midst of deciding a matter whether interest on interest will be payable or not. And hopefully that matter will get decided soon. It will have very, very wide ramification for the industry. But at the same time, when businesses are looking to come out of the situation, it is really, really important that they are able to generate cash flow and able to pay. As Kamath Committee has already come out with a one-time restructuring guidelines. And in my practice, I'm already seeing some situations where banks are making effort because the deadline right now, which is set, is end of December for the one-time restructuring. So the proposals going around. So to Mr. Kanoria, I would like to first take your experience right now, as in you are a business owner, you've got a very, very challenging task right now. I think you've been in this situation for the last 9 months, is still able to continue. So it will be really good to hear from you how you've been able to tackle these challenges, and what do you think from government and banking and financial institution, some kind of help is required for business to move forward.
Thanks, Nishad. Thanks, ET, for giving this opportunity to share my views on this panel today, more particularly on a topic and a subject which is very dear to me. I recall when in 2014, I met the PMO and shared my perspective when I was at the helm of ASSOCHAM, and shared what are the things which India should do on a policy matter to revive the economy. And one of the things was that I had suggested that a bankruptcy law should be brought in. And I was surprised to see that in 2.5 years' time, bankruptcy law was there in place. I would say I also had the opportunity to give my views into the parliamentary committee under oath on this IBC code. Therefore, it's a very, very important tool for India and India to grow as an economic bill. It came in, there were a lot of, in the last about now, almost about 4 years now, from 2016 mid it started to get implemented. A lot of evolution has happened, a lot of learnings have happened. Some good, some having its own challenges. But I see that what we have maybe faltered or maybe we have not been able to look at is the trust factor of the entrepreneurs. If you see the bill itself, when it was designed, the key preamble says that in an economy and a society, the entrepreneurs should not fail, even if businesses fail. Because if entrepreneurs fail, then you have a challenge in the economy for growth. And I think that is where we have kind of missed out to a large extent, more particularly when the amendment happened of 29A, where the promoters were debarred from bidding into the asset, which is not there in most of the world, in none of the countries. Yes, in any situation, if there's a problem from the equity holder, the creditors would get a right and they have a choice to make under the structure which was there. So I don't see that a 29A should have been brought in. And more particularly today, with COVID, with the challenges which businesses would face, the impact of it will not come today. We will see this impact after 1 year, after 10 months, after 1.5 years, 2 years. It takes time for anyone to die. Even if someone has a disease, it takes time. Even a cancer takes a couple of years to build up. So therefore, the same thing is that the impact of this, if it is not given correct measures or correct policy solutions, it will have a problem of continuity today or tomorrow. I believe firmly that this suspension of the IBC at this point of time was not appropriate. It should be there, because if we see what is the fallback, the fallback which RBI has come out with is the 6th August guideline, which is so specific that it will not get effectively implemented to all. Every customer, every entrepreneur is unique. It needs a tailor-made solution. And this will not effectively work. You cannot give a specific, a general dose to everyone that you give this to everyone. Then people have to fall back on the 7th June 19 circular, which was the old circular before COVID. And that, to my mind, has lost its relevance. My view is that the regulator should come out at least with some new guideline, which will take care of post-pandemic solution in general. Otherwise, let it go through the IBC. Repacks are being proposed. Let that happen. That may bring in a certain benefit. Otherwise, what is going to happen going forward is that the businesses and the entrepreneur, he is going to get flushed with so many creditors pouncing upon him from all sides. He will not know how to handle and what to manage. At least IBC was a process through which it can take care of, find a solution, sitting around in a structured way with the creditors. So I think it is important to review these policy notes and see how it can be better off for ensuring a proper continuity and growth of the economy with the businesses growing.
Thank you, Mr. Kanori. I think you are raising many relevant issues, and I'd like to definitely follow up with you on some of those aspects. Definitely, I think this pandemic, what I have seen more particularly, though in the past there has been this perception that promoters have failed the banks. However, this pandemic, everyone got to realize that there is something beyond everyone's control. And it's not promoters who are always failing the business. Business has its own risks. And the banks have to also understand those risks and see how they can ring fence those risks. And ultimately, if the promoter has the ability to actually revive the business and promoter is always in the best position, then there should be some relaxation of section 29A for sure, because from a business continuity point of view, that is also very relevant because you can change the sponsor. And in certain situation, for sure, change of the sponsor is definitely required to bolster the confidence of creditors and new financiers. However, the law needs to also recognize that the existing promoter may have better ability to continue with the business. So,
Add, Nishan, just so that it will help in the audience to understand. See, also we must understand where India is positioned. India is not a developed country. All the ecosystem has not got developed. It is still a developing country. So there is lots of businesses which is very personally connected. The management of the ground level ecosystem and also the many cases, very large businesses and companies, you may have certain structures where it is easy to sell. But otherwise, if in the medium and the sized businesses, if the promoter is not there, it is very difficult for the business to get revived.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think it's time that our lawmakers need to reckon that somehow we need to provide better tools for the promoters to actually come back into business and continue with that. Though there's a provision in the insolvency and bankruptcy provision, section 12A, which provides that promoters may provide for a settlement plan. However, it has a much higher threshold of 90% approval. And it makes very, very difficult for the promoters to actually gain that level of acceptance. And obviously, there are other resistances as well. But I take your point. It's a very, very valid point, especially in the time that we are going through. So, Akash, in that context, as a banker, when you are dealing with so many stress situations, you have to take a lot of practical calls, right? And especially when the companies are slipped into CIRP process, during that time, the RP becomes the sole proprietor, if I may say that, of the business and has very, very heavy sort of responsibility, I must say, to sort of take care of the business as a custodian of the business. And in that context, I want to understand from a practical point of view, what are the challenges you are seeing from a business continuity perspective?
Thanks a lot on this, and thanks ET for setting up this platform. And yeah, so these are very uncertain times, and it's naturally the best time for us to sort of relook at and deliberate in terms of how far we've come. Like Sunilji highlighted, right? Say we must say pat on the back, right, in terms of how far we've come from when we started. But the situation is very dynamic, and say given that situation, I think we have to recognize say one thing, that there is no one size fit all say solution, right? Even in bankruptcy, right, we've seen that the sort of tools which are there and the success which is there from the CIRP process is very different for certain kind of companies, and for certain kind of companies, because of the intricacies, right? So bankruptcy is not a good solution, right? So for example, if you look at the data, so just to sort of give a case in point, EPC companies, right? So far, almost none of EPC companies have sort of come out, say, resurrected or successful from a IBC say process, right? And hence, say each kind of company will have its own say way forward. And I think ultimate responsibility for all stakeholders is to first and foremost see how do we sort of revive the business, right? And therefore, all the historical reasons, maybe we've put say various say conditions, maybe say 29A, say 2 year back. I think if you look at it, when the bankruptcy say started, I think view from most of the creditors was that IBC will be the panacea, and you just put the company there, and you will get good outcomes, right? And we've seen say what has happened now. So, and what on ground, at least I am seeing, is that say while say moratorium or suspension should not have been done. So this is also sort of put back sort of focus and effort back from all the stakeholders to try and see that without going to bankruptcy, can we create a resolution, right? So it's a lot more active effort from all stakeholders, and we are seeing some green shoots there. There are say various companies where under the ICA process, say success has come out, right? So we have to look at the condition that we are in, right? So like it was mentioned, India is not a very deep market, right? It is not a developed economy. It is a capital-starved, say, country. So there was, say, when it all say started, say, flush of, say, foreign capital which came in, right? And in some cases, it was a success, right? But when we go down sort of, say, deep in the value chain, right? So particularly, so for a very large company, very strong asset base, maybe some of these successes that we've seen. But for smaller entrepreneurs, right? Say more often than not, right? If you just sort of ignore him from the picture, right? More say mid-market say companies, right? Say the resolution becomes that much more say difficult. So in all the laws that we have, we ought to sort of bring in a lot more flexibility. And like it has been well recognized now that at the end of it all, it is the commercial say judgment of the creditors. Say particularly in the current context where there are so many companies which are going through say the challenges that they are, and the courts of IBC are not there. The much talked about pre-pack, right, which is a case in point where the stakeholders could have a discussion with the existing sponsor, come to a closure, and sort of achieve a timely closure, right? I would reckon that it is high time that we sort of expedite the thought process on that, and try and say bring that, right, because there are too many companies which are say having say problems. Second, say despite best of our intentions and effort, the bandwidth of the courts are what they are, right? And they are not going to change say very fast, right? And the usual IBC process, if that has to go on for so many companies, right, unfortunately I'm not too sure how much success will come. So we have to deal with the resources that we have and try and come out with the solutions where the outcomes are fast tracked. And say the challenging times so sometimes say pushes us all back to the wall, and say we will make the best of this, and say come out with more compelling say solutions which will be here to stay.
No, Akash, some of the observation you're making definitely resonate with me, and I'm sure with many audience, um, because time is of the essence. And in the investment world, if it takes more time, your investment gets time corrected. I've seen that an issue, obviously, for the banks because it is taking more time. Also, for other new participants in the market, like hedge funds or distressed asset funds who want to pick up a pie, and if the court process is taking longer than usual, then it's just not the best investment asset also for some of the market participants. And you raised another good point about EPC contractor, which I like to come back, not the business in particular, but the fact that there are assets which may be resolvable better outside IBC, because there are assets which are asset light, there are assets which are very asset heavy, and the liquidity value may differ from asset to asset. And in that sense, one size doesn't fit all, and you may need a different resolution process to maximize value, which is the hallmark of IBC itself. So, Misha, in that context, since you have done so many landmark litigation and time has become obviously a relevant factor, and I guess in the beginning, IBC had its own teething issues. And I would say at some level, courts have done fantastic job because they were also given the most tough task in the sense that they got the hardest case first to resolve, and which obviously were more contentious and would have taken more time. But in the context of business continuity, one of the most important things for the banks and all these stakeholders is to ensure that the value of the asset is kept intact. And we have resolution professionals who are the custodian of these assets. And in that respect, I'd like to get your thoughts from your practical experience. What are the challenges banks face or even RP faces to discharge their duties to maintain the assets in a good condition and continue with the business as is?
Right. Thanks, Nishant, and thanks, CT, for this platform and a wonderful panelist to be sharing my views with. So, before I come to the problems that the resolution professionals and the COC face in terms of business continuity, I would just like to spend a few minutes in terms of what is the legal paradigm for the business continuity in the IBC. So as we all know that IBC is a more of an insolvency resolution law rather than for liquidation of the corporate. So what it is intended at by definition, a resolution plan which we are looking at is for the business continuity, the company to continue as a going concern. And for that reason, the moment an insolvency professional takes over as a resolution professional of a company, the code mandates certain functions and duties on the RP. Firstly, the RP replaces the powers of the board. So while all the powers of the board of director are suspended, RP is vested with the management of the company. So quite apart from the function of running the CIR process, RPs are also discharging literally the central role of management of the company. And as part of that, they have the duty to maintain the company as a going concern with the end goal in sight, which is that company continues out after this process as a going concern. But by very definition, this duty or this role is on a best endeavor basis. So one cannot expect a corporate which has not been functional for a couple of years to suddenly revive under the reins of the resolution professional. While we've seen several cases where the resolution professionals have done fantastic job of continuing the company as a going concern, but there are several issues that RPs face in ensuring that, and COVID pandemic has only multiplied the problems or made it even difficult. Firstly, from taking over the asset base of the company itself. While normal circumstances as well, there have been several instances where suddenly an RP, an outsider, comes over and takes over the company. It is difficult to inspire that kind of control and ability to manage the company. But given the pandemic and restrictions of lockdown, it has been, compromised even further. But we do have solutions built into the system of the IBC for that. For instance, we have, equally a duty and obligation imposed on the management, promoters, and anyone associated with the company to fully cooperate with the resolution professional for ensuring that they can take over the asset, take over the management, etc. And in case they fail to cooperate, there is also a legal recourse to go to the adjudicating authority, the National Company Law Tribunal, seized off the matter to require that kind of assistance. But the biggest problem, I think, apart from just, some of the recent problems of the lockdown, which is, taking physical control of the assets, I think bigger problem is the information asymmetry. Because ultimately, it's the promoter or the management which has the best information about the company. And an outsider, an insolvency professional can only do as much, to take over the control and get the data collected, put together an information memorandum which is meaningful to run the entire insolvency resolution process. So the cooperation with the management and the promoters to run this process is crucial. And this kind of goes back to, the 29A issue, which Mr. Kanoria raised, that we've seen several, in fact, in the twilight zone when 29A was not there. There were several accounts where the companies and the promoters themselves saw, IBC as a good medium to take forward and restructure the account. But the moment 29A came in, the cooperation and just went away from the promoter side. So that is a huge problem which comes in the way of resolution professional and COCs. This leads to another problem which we've seen cropping up in the recent times, which is because of information asymmetry, the resolution applicants claiming after successfully bidding for an asset that a correct and accurate picture of the corporate data was not presented to them. Frankly, the resolution professionals, while of course they are expected to work work with the highest diligence and do their best in putting it together, it's not enough for you to just put together the balance sheets of the company and present it as an information memorandum. A lot more work needs to go into it. But once that resolution professional has discharged their duty, there's still an information gap, because of which, a lot of resolution applicants today are seeking to withdraw from the process because they don't seem to have strategic inputs or the entire information about the continuity of business. For instance, you may have a very relevant asset of the company housed in a promoter entity. We've seen instances where there have been litigation around intellectual property, leasehold rights. The assets are sitting not in the company, they're sitting with the promoter group entity or with the promoter. And it gets very challenging at that point of time to run the process successfully for an outsider to come and assume control of the corporate data. So these are some of the challenges. Another very interesting issue in context of business continuity we've seen, and I think we've not fully jurisprudentially in terms of court precedents resolved it yet, is for the purposes of business continuity, if certain trade vendors or suppliers insist on being paid some of their corporate insolvency resolution process dues. Otherwise, they would not do business. And if they're crucial suppliers for you to continue the business, what is the option for the resolution professional? Is it possible? Because legally speaking, the RP has the power to renegotiate contracts. Of course, there are certain limitations under 28, certain material contracts, you need to go back to the COC. And typically, as matter of good practice, I've seen resolution professionals, even before taking business decisions, which is primarily in their own domain, do go back to COC to at least keep them informed, right? So in those kind of cases, is it permissible for you, after having admitted their dues, pre-CIRP dues as claims, to pay a part of it to ensure to incentivize those trade creditors to continue doing business with you? This is something which I think we haven't, as an Indian law, given a full answer to, but while looking at this issue, we looked at certain foreign jurisdictions. And one of the legal principles which emerged is termed as doctrine of necessity. So it's a commercial call. And if the RP and the COC, in consultation with the RP, feels that it's a business necessity for you to pay off certain creditors to ensure they continue the critical supplies for the continuity of the business, that's a call which, frankly, I feel needs to be allowed to be taken, rather than a very hard and fast rule that you cannot make payments for pre-CIRP dues. Because ultimately, the purpose is business continuity, ensuring that the company can continue as a going concern. You're making, 2%, 3% of the payment of the claims may make business sense to eventually have a good, resolution. Unlike a scenario where you are not allowed to make such payments and the business comes to a standstill. So these are some of the issues which we are still grappling with, and we need to find better solutions to.
Thank you, Misha. I think these are really, really relevant issues which are right now happening and affecting the whole CIRP process. But one point I just noticed in our panel discussion, seems like Section 29A has a very, very special sort of space for business continuity, because it seems to me is not creating the right incentive for the promoter to cooperate. And that's the point Mr. Kanoria made in the beginning, that the fact that 29A was just put in and it just handicapped the promoters. There has to be a better mechanism for us to maximize the value, because maximization of value can only happen if the business goes as a going concern and there is a business continuity. And which is where, Mr. Kanoria, I would like to get your views, though at some level, our courts with their limited capacity have done fantastic jobs. This is a brand new law. We've got many amendments in the IBC at a very, very fast pace. Our government also acted very quickly. But if I were to look at the whole infrastructure, as Misha pointed out, RP has many duties. What you think government should be doing to improve the infrastructure? For example, more training for the judges, or streamlining, the duties and responsibilities for the RP, and creating better infrastructure to deal with the business continuity issue.
See, I think two important aspects is there. One is the RP himself needs to get much better trained in the managing businesses. Today, if you see, most of the RPs have been pure professionals in terms of a chartered accountant or a lawyer. Very few are real business people who have run businesses and who have come and are taking over RP's role. I think if it starts to happen, it will help in bringing in better professionalism into this thing. So how do you attract that talent into this area, into this space, where they get an opportunity to basically work out, to get into the business, running the business for that period of time, and getting experience of multiple businesses. So I think that is one talent, how you attract talent, how you create it in a better way. It would help the overall system, and through these forums and through multiple channels, it can help. The second basically is, and this is what I said, I recall in 2016, when the bill got passed, just a week later, I was addressing a conference on IBC, the new code, and it was full of all the judges. And I said that at that moment of time, that it is very important to bring in expert judiciary, bring in training to the judiciary on this kind of a law. What is the impact of it? Because this is a commercial law. It is not a pure law and law. I recall that when in the parliamentary committee, I was having that interaction. I was really, when I said that this is a bill for entrepreneurs, and one of the parliamentary members said that this is a law for common man, for business people, not for lawyers. I remember in that panel we had a few law firms also representing, and I was from the industry. And they said that we need solutions on the commercial aspect, not purely on legal technical words. And that is how economy will evolve. So therefore, if you see, the intent of the law was very good. It is important, and the responsibility is there to ensure that all professionals, entire law, legal fraternity, everyone, industry, all come together to try and give that inputs, which will help in strengthening this more in terms of ensuring that the economy comes up much more stronger. They will, otherwise, I feel there will be a lot of wastage of national resources, national assets, which is already happening, and it will only further increase. We need to understand where India is. We need to create our rules, policies in a manner which will evolve as India grows, not just going and getting something from the outside. So the training of the judiciary, if we have to get experts from overseas to have some exposure, some sharing of experiences and knowledge on what situations, what has happened in different global market, it will help a lot.
Mr. Kanoria made a very interesting point, Akash, in the context of how resolution process can be made faster with some upgradation that we need on the infrastructure side, especially more business-like folk in the RP role and processes. And you made very interesting point on the pre-pack. And Mr. Kanoria also mentioned in the beginning that we don't have Section 29A in other jurisdiction. And that's been my experience when I practiced in the US. Pre-pack was the easiest way to keep the value of the business intact. And the experiences which I had was whenever there was a situation of looming bankruptcy, bankers got together, they got a business plan, they had a prospective buyer, you go to the court and you get the blessing. So it's like you go in there, you come out, and everything is good to go. And this is how you're able to protect the value of the asset. Though in India, we've been talking about the pre-pack mechanism. And however, we have not been able to remaking, and there has not been any talk yet about when the regulations are going to come out. And you also made a very interesting point that one size doesn't fit all. Therefore, CIRP is not the remedy in each and every case. So now the way I look at it, we got pre-IBC and we got IBC. And in that respect, I like to get your insight and experience right now in the pre-IBC process, especially when IBC has been suspended and the bankers are left with very limited tool to actually deal with the stress account and restructure the assets. Where you seeing the challenges in the current environment to utilize the 7 June framework or to even figure out a resolution process outside IBC? And do you think that as soon as the IBC moratorium is out, you would be actually going for the IBC resolution process?
So it's a very good question, Nishant, and I think say pre-pack naturally was say it's top of my mind because in the current say circumstances there are so many companies where say whenever we are discussing say resolution, right? It is say we always think that if we had a faster route, right? Because it's not that in a lot of companies there is an issue with regard to how the resolution will come, say whether there is a prospective buyer, so on and so forth, right? But is just say that capability to fit it in a say structure which is say permissible in law. Now, for example, say where we stand on most of the situations, right, is that A, we have to preserve value of the company, and B, then say once the storm is behind us, then get a final solution. And in say preserving value of the company, right, say very large say challenge is working capital say depletion. Now, pre-IBC, the ICA framework is there, say restructuring guidelines as they are there, but that requires a lot of say negotiation closure for restructuring. There are multiple CPs, right, which cannot get done very fast, right? And we all recognize that working capital is lifeline of the business. For example, what IBC does, right, which is still a tool which is not that well utilized, is the interim financing, right? Because interim financing in IBC is something which is doable because by statute, right, a creditor who will say support that will have his incremental finance ring fence, right? Which unfortunately there is no other simple mechanism to be done outside of IBC, right? Now, if we have a moratorium on one side, a suspension, the company doesn't have working capital. We don't know how many months it will require more. If there is no working capital, what will happen to that business at that point in time, right, is anybody's guess, right? So whenever we sort of say think through say pre-pack, right, it could have various of these say contours, right? It could be that say all the stakeholders have decided on the change of control, and say they go and they take blessings of the court, right? Because there are so many benefits which are there say through a IBC process, right? All the creditors get closed, say so on and so forth. But there could be some circumstances where the solution is not ready, right? And it may just be very important that the primary objective of going and getting into a IBC is to be in a say position first to salvage value of the company by maybe giving interim financing, right, and stabilize the operation, and then after that, at some point in time when we are all there, then get to the right say closure. The biggest limitation of trying to do some of these things outside IBC is that that flexibility is not there. And under ICA process, to have an intercreditor in place, and then to have say some of these things say tied up, it is very challenging to get it done in a shorter period of time. Some of the more complicated companies, right? So, for example, so especially you look at the financial services or real estate, right, which are not necessarily say more say manufacturing kind, right? In financial services, for example, we all know that say the class of creditors are very say diversified, right? It is generally not just the say banking finance, it is NCD, it is retail say debenture holders. Now, without having a say structure and a format to get that diverse a universe, right, which will have various gradients of understanding of these say processes on the same page, is not possible. And ICA, while new amendments have come through, right, but so we are still long way, right? So on one side we have ICA slash say restructuring. On second side we have a very straight jacketed IBC. The middle ground, say, which is more sort of say flexible approach, is potentially say prepack, which is completely missing right now. And just one more thought, say, which I can add, right, is say, for example, say I talked about interim financing, right? Now, interim financing also, even in IBC cases, is not that well utilized, right? And we have to also look at it how regulation can sort of say come together with the framework. And to give a sense, interim financing naturally is the safest, almost safest form of say credit which one can give, right? But the challenge for the bankers to not sort of open up is that while interim financing will stack up super priority, but the monthly servicing, which is a requirement for banks by regulation, is something which is not possible. Now, for example, for agri financing, where there is a natural say tie-up in terms of NPA classification, because there it is well recognized that the agri cycle is 365 days, and hence the repayment only kicks in after 365 days. Similarly, if we could sort of look at a regulation change where interim financing given by the bankers, right, repayment rather than having a monthly repayment can be somewhere linked with the say closure of the bankruptcy process or 365 days, say people will be more willing to give that, and say that lifeline support can do wonders for revival of the company.
I agree, Akash. I think we need more robust pre-IBC framework, because IBC is a fairly straightforward process of 270 days, which lays down how certain processes are going to happen. Of course, there's a lot of room right now within the IBC to enable the bankers, various participants, even for that matter, the existing promoter, who is definitely handicapped because of Section 29A, though we have certain relaxation for the promoters for MSMEs sectors. We got to do a little more. And there, the promoters' remedy is also very limited, as we discussed earlier, under Section 12A of IBC, which requires 90% approval. So, Mishra, there, I wanted to get some thoughts from your side. Many litigations that you have handled, and promoters have fought back very hard, and rightly so. As in, if I were a promoter, I will not let my business go. If I feel that I have sweated out and I have not done anything wrong, the forensic report should be able to point that out, right? So, and government has a remedy. You can prosecute me on a criminal side. But if business fail, it's a judgment call, and business judgment under law is always protected. And there, I want to know how 12A versus the regular resolution process has affected the resolution in a way their value could have been maximized. If the lenders were to cooperate, if I may put it that way, with the promoter and look at the resolution plan presented by the promoter, and I can understand some of these marquee litigation which have happened, there have been some issues, but there's so many other cases where there are good promoters who have done fairly well for their companies, and how we can make 12A a more effective remedy, given this is the limited remedy a promoter has right now, unless the law is changed, versus a regular resolution process.
Um, Very frankly, Nishant, 12A has come about because somewhere it's been felt that the effects of 29A are far reaching and beyond than what may have been intended. And, some of the 29A disqualifications, I think no one can have a quarrel with. But it becomes controversial in aspects like account being NPA for more than a year as on the insolvency commencement date, and more so in context of the fact that the net of 29 is far and wide. When you look at the definition of connected persons, a lot of time, promoter families, which are big business families, really struggle to make a point that, there's been a partition, these are separate businesses, the brother's business is should not disqualify. So I think apart from maybe re-looking at NPA disqualification, which according to me certainly has a rationale, while we have expressed sympathy to the fact that somewhere 29A has become too stringent, but at the same time, and let me clarify that I personally feel that there is a logic to 29A. You definitely don't want defaulting promoters to get back the company at a discount. But frankly and ideally, it should have been a call which is again should have been taken within commercial domain with the prudence of the lenders. But there is clearly a certain level of trust deficit in the way the entire process works, because of which there is a need for greater regulation and control. Because if we look back at the scheme of the IBC, otherwise speaking, it's a very facilitative kind of a outline of a process with enough flexibility within the hands of the creditors to design the process. But because there is a certain level of trust deficit in different aspects and the way the process may function, that there has been a need for greater control. But whether 12A by itself, settlement with the promoter, is the right kind of a solution or not depends on a lot of stuff. And I'm not particularly sure whether that needs to be strengthened, to a large extent. Yes, 90% threshold is a huge ask, but I think because it is an exception and is going to completely take the company out of a process which is thought through an entire scheme of IBC, I think there has to be a higher threshold. But one of the aspects where I find 12A becomes really challenging technically is because this is the withdrawal process by the applicant. So sometimes the companies have been taken into IBC by an operational creditor, and the lenders and the financial creditors actually see the viability of the company. They have faith in the promoter and they do want to take the company out of the IBC. But because of one operational creditor or maybe that kind of a thing, if the moment that applicant or a minority financial creditor, a 2% financial creditor, otherwise 90% agree, but 2% financial creditor applicant is not on board and doesn't agree to withdraw, then technically that remedy is not available to us. So that's where it needs to be clarified for sure. I personally feel that there is a scope of it being clarified in a judge-made law as well, but ideally should have come by the statute itself, because there is an interpretational problem. But more than 12A, I think we've been talking about pre-packs. Now, pre-packs has worked wonderfully in other jurisdictions, and we see the logic of it. But I'm not sure whether pre-packs can really be and properly be introduced by way of regulations, because it actually requires an amendment in the scheme of the code. because the way the entire corporate insolvency resolution process is designed, it is premised on a public competitive bidding process. The moment you bring in pre-packs, that's where the dichotomy comes. And unless you bring in a special chapter which allows the financial creditor and the promoter to run a special process within the IBC, which is different from the regular corporate insolvency resolution process, I'm not sure whether you can really and validly bring in and effectively bring in PPACs by merely by way of regulations or rules or government notifications. I know IBC has come in for a lot of criticism because of multiple amendments, but most of them have been necessary. And I think merely because they are amendments in the statute by itself should not qualify for criticism, as long as that makes the statute more meaningful. But that's one question which needs to be thought through. I know there is a necessity, there's a lot of pressure because of COVID pandemic situation to bring in a solution which is not as harsh as IBC, and pre-packs are being thought to be brought in through regulations. But I think that would be within the meaning of a legal scheme of IBC be a mistake, and it really truly requires an amendment to effectively bring in pre-packs into the scheme of IBC.
Nisha, I think you made some interesting observation about the pre-pack. I think definitely need of the hour is we need more alternative ways of approaching the stress asset resolution to maximize value. In that context, I come back to Mr. Kanoria because he made very interesting observation that IBC shouldn't have been suspended during this time. And in a way, I agree with him because rule of law is rule of law, and it should be the same regardless of what time we are living in. And definitely, it's a very extraordinary situation. However, I feel that lenders would have acted responsibly, and that's what by and large I've seen in the industry. If they don't see IBC as a remedy, I've seen hesitation in the lenders to take the asset to IBC, and they try always their best to make a resolution unless they see IBC as an imminent process. So I want to get your thought process. If let's say IBC was available today during this pandemic time, would it make any difference in the resolution process? Because one immediate thought which comes to my mind, when many creditors are not getting paid, there was a way for the business owners to get some kind of moratorium or some kind of resolution mechanism can be incentivized. But it's a very interesting point that you made, that irrespective of what time we are living in, suspension of IBC was not required.
You see, I take a little bigger picture. One is a suspension was not required. And secondly, we had a pandemic. We are still in the middle of the pandemic, I would say. Many places increasing now, and this is not going to end very soon. I think the whole situation with the pandemic has not been addressed well in the country for a business continuity. I even have a question on the moratorium which happened. As a lender, I firmly believe we should not have had that moratorium. What should have been done, which has happened in many other countries also, is the regulator should have just provided that the lenders should go out and support their businesses, do the restructuring based on the revised cash flow, because you've had a pandemic which has disrupted the cash flow. It is going to be difficult in many businesses to understand when that cash flow will be normal or whether it will be different. Based on that, if the decision was left to the lenders itself, in terms of understanding each client of theirs, because they understand them best, and working out a solution together, create an enabling environment as a policy framework to allow that. What would have happened? All this moratorium issue, people going to Supreme Court, getting whether interest on interest, etc. All this would have been addressed. A very simple regulation. Please go out and support your clients in whatever manner. Yes, what the lenders are concerned with is the NPA provisions, which impacts their capital, which impacts their profitability, which impacts everything. Where the regulator should have done is had a certain forbearance on that. Said that, fine, the environment is challenging. We want the banking system to get protected. So we want the capital adequacy to be higher. for the next 2 years or 1 year or 3 years. We want a higher liquidity ratios. We want overall general provisions to be a little higher over this period of time in order to ensure that if there are economic shocks because of this, the banking system is also overall protected. Rather than giving them specific guideline on the NPA of 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or 180 days, it should have been left to the lenders and create a mechanism of managing that better. I would say this would have gone a longer way in addressing the issues in the economy. At that juncture, if you are putting an embargo on the IBC, I would have understood. But because you don't have an alternate policy framework, you need IBC as a protector of the entrepreneurs at this juncture. But with certain amendment, as I have said, if all those don't happen, then obviously a promoter is left in the lurch. So COVID has hit, people will again go to courts, saying that because of COVID it has happened, so you can't take away my asset without having my right to be able to restructure. So I think it's all about how we trust entrepreneurs in the country. Our own entrepreneurs is very important. If that trust, as you had said, that the trust deficit is there. If we don't trust our people, we cannot progress as a nation. It is, whether it is a small family, if we don't trust our spouses, we don't trust our family, a family will disintegrate, our communities, our nation as a whole. Our premise of any policy has to be that there is a trust factor, without which people will not make investment, without which development will not happen. And I firmly believe that if other policy frameworks are not there, IBC is very critical to be there with certain amendments which will help the economy and the entrepreneurs to progress.
Definitely, sir. I think it's a very interesting take on the policy matter, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. And Nisha raised this point of trust deficit as well. I think the trust is the heart and soul of the financial markets anywhere in the globe, and all our policies should gear towards creating that trust rather than creating any doubt and suspicion about it. Because once that created, I think everyone starts suspecting the other person, and the whole system starts to crumble. So, Akash, I know you must be having a lot of tough time these days, many stress situations emerging, and must be waiting for the Supreme Court ruling to come out, because that's when the action will start, I guess, in many accounts, because that's a real test whether businesses will be able to pay as their dues come. In that context, Akash, what are the other challenges you are seeing for the cash flow side, especially some of the RBI guidelines which have recently come? And more importantly, I want to also get your thoughts on ARC's role in the resolution process, given that just recently RBI came out with a little more factors on the ARC as a resolution applicant in the entire process.
No, while the challenges we've discussed, say good thing is that at least over last week, say 10 days, right, there is some positivity which is coming back, right, say with the announcements of all the vaccinations, so on and so forth. And I think, say, cash flow is challenging, but there is a meaningful, say, polarization in the businesses, right? So things which we all thought would go through a very, very long sort of say protected issue, right? For example, say residential real estate, right? Say sales, at least we are seeing, is coming back, right? Say initiatives from the government. So some parts of the businesses have started doing well. But I think understandably, there are going to be businesses which will take longer, right? And say particularly say businesses which are more focused on say hospitality, so on and so forth. And I think, like we discussed, the challenges are what they are. And I think, say while all the schemes which have come, right, say whether one-time restructuring scheme, and I think, say particularly we are looking forward to the say government guaranteed say 20% incremental financing, say where the contracts are yet to be out, these are all say one will have to pick and choose, right? And I think say in our country at least it takes a lot of effort to build a business, right? It is all on all the stakeholders to do all the right things to ensure that businesses say survive. So we will do that. ARCs and the stress asset funds, so naturally in the overall ecosystem, they play an extremely important role. But I think, say it brings us back to the say, fundamentals in the stress assets resolution, which is say what we discussed in great detail. That certainty of the outcome as well as the say, timely action and say resolution, right? If these two things are say taken care of, then I think the participation both from the stress funds as well as ARCs, right, in terms of their own confidence and conviction to sort of say take control of the assets will strengthen significantly. And unfortunately, because of say these uncertainties, the bid ask is always very high, right, and that sort of leads to uh, say lower transactions. And I think fundamental say purpose of asset reconstruction companies was to try and create a platform, right, which could sort of aggregate debt and represent say multitude of say creditors, which because of the uncertainty and say longer time frame has not worked as well as it should have, right? So we have to sort of focus on the fundamentals, and I think once the fundamentals are in place, the markets will take care of itself, and so there is enough and more capital, right, which is out there to which understands and which can say, support revival of the business, uh, which is hugely required.
Thank you, Akash. I think with this, I would close the panel discussion because we have run out of time. But thank you all for listening in. It's been a wonderful session. I have personally got a lot of insight what's going on the ground. And I think government needs to do definitely more to make sure that we can have wider participation, because this pandemic has been very, very tough. And if we want to attract more capital in the stress asset, we need to definitely come up with more remedy and resolution framework other than the IBC itself. And that's where, in my view, we will be able to maximize the value. Otherwise, any stress asset is like a melting ice cube. So if we are not able to protect the value, then there will be nothing left. So thank you, ET, and thank you, my co-panelist. It's really wonderful to have you. And thanks again for everyone's time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your knowledge and experience with our audiences. With this, we'll move to the last session of the day. Stay tuned and keep tweeting using the hashtag ETLegalWorld.